Internal report into a sexual misconduct scandal. Allegations emerged last week that a number of staff members hired prostitutes while working in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. The Oxfam report includes claims that 3 employees physically threatened and intimidated a witness. CNN's Phil Black has been following the story and joins us from London. And Phil, what is the new information in the report? Are they naming names? What are we finding out?
No names, but yes, some information, Maggie. Now, this was the report, the very existence of which, some of its findings, when reported by a UK newspaper, that eventually led to the scandal consuming Oxfam and concern over the wider aid sector. We knew that 7 people had been investigated by Oxfam in Haiti, 7 of its staff members, for using prostitutes and other allegations. All 7 have left the organisation, either resigned or been dismissed. The key new nugget of information that you touched on there is that 3 of those people, suspects as they're referred to in the report, were found to have physically threatened and intimidated a witness helping the investigation. This is said to have happened after one of the suspect's line managers leaked an investigation document. So those 3 had charges, this is again what they're referred to in the report, charges of bullying and intimidation added to the list of ugly behaviour, which eventually saw them forced from the organisation. Now, Oxfam's country director in Haiti, its top man in Haiti, according to the report, did admit during the investigation process to using prostitutes on Oxfam property, offered his resignation, which was accepted. And in the words of the report, it says that was accepted to, quote, allow a phased and dignified exit from Oxfam. More recently, he has denied in an open letter published by Belgian media, he denies the use of prostitutes. The other key interesting point, I think, is that in the early reporting of this scandal, it was talked about the report not substantiating the use of underage prostitutes, but without the context of understanding just why that was specifically an issue to be looked at. We now know from the report that this was one of the initial allegations, but couldn't be substantiated. And in the words of the report, it cannot be ruled out that any of the prostitutes were underage, Maggie.
And Phil, is the release of this, is the timing significant? How does it jive with you know, what's been happening outside of Oxfam in the press?
Well, it's entirely connected to Oxfam's huge and necessary efforts to rebuild trust. Of course, Oxfam's critics will say, well, it's about time that this has been released, because people are angry about 2 things. First, that this was allowed to happen, but secondly, the perception, the belief that Oxfam wasn't entirely candid and forthcoming on the scope, the scale, precisely what it was investigated at the time that all of this was unfolding. The report itself has been redacted. Some names and details have been blacked out, but Oxfam says an unredacted version, a complete version, will be presented to the Haitian government. It says it's doing all of this to try and be as transparent as possible about the decisions that were made at the time of the investigation and in respect of the huge breach of trust that the whole process has caused. Maggie.
All right, Phil Black with the latest details. Thank you so much, Phil. With markets in the U.S. closed for President's Day, the focus for investors today is on Europe. Let's speak to Jasper Lawler. He's head of research and education at London Capital Group. Jasper, it's great to see you. It's always a bit of a quiet day. Not only U.S. markets closed, China closed as well. But what is sentiment like in Europe right now? We saw a lot of those indices come off the lows in lockstep with U.S. We've had a bit of a recovery. But what are people talking about? How are they feeling? Are they confident it could last?
Well, I think you're right to point to the thin volumes today, and so we're slightly lower in European markets, but you can't really read too much into that. I think probably the scenario that we're looking at is a sort of global phenomenon in a way, where we had that sort of opportunistic dip buying at that 10% correction level, which we saw here in Europe as well as the US. We've retraced around half to 2/3 of those losses that we saw in those dramatic falls from the record highs. So now those sort of traders who are trading in opportunistically probably don't quite have the confidence, because there's some competing outlooks on what's really driving this market. Either that was just a technical sell-off driven by just very low volatility leading into it, naturally meaning a sudden burst of volatility, but otherwise things are good. to those on the more negative end of the scale who are pointing to this rise in inflation, rise in bond yields, which could translate into a more difficult time for equities going forward. So there's that battle going on in this middle ground, and so hence I think we're not seeing too much movement, and we're probably not going to until US return to trading tomorrow.
Yeah, and we may need to see some of that data start to come in to figure out whether those never usually something that's smooth or easy for the markets. Italian elections, a lot of talk about the banking system there. Is there a feeling that Italian banks can handle the outcome, the political uncertainty that may be surrounding this upcoming election?
I think you're definitely right to point to those banks, Maggie, because they generally tend to be the area of the market that come under the most pressure when there is political uncertainty. On the flip side, they tend to do the best when the political uncertainty subsides. There doesn't seem to be a lot of worry in the market at the moment about this Italian election, not nearly as much as there was, for example, before the French election. I think a lot of that is currency related. When we were going into the French election, there was a genuine risk to the euro. There were candidates, Marine Le Pen for one, who were promising to try and bring France out of the euro. I think the populists have learnt a few lessons from the defeats last year, and actually they're talking a bit less about the currency in Europe at the moment and talking about more general themes like immigration. And so that probably helps the cause of the populists. They're probably going to do better in the elections, but the net result is that from a market perspective, there's just not going to be quite as much fallout.
That is a very, very good point, Jasper, and you're quite right. It has been a learning curve for everyone. Thank you so much. We'll let you get back to business. Jasper Lawler for us. Still to come, a Russian athlete is facing accusations of doping at the Winter Olympics. We'll have the latest from Pyeongchang.
All new African Voices. This week, artists draw from their environment to give new life to old art forms.
My creative space is everywhere and anywhere. What the community is going through.
African Voices, Tuesday on CNN, in association with Glow.
Formula E is the future.
You never know what's going to happen.
The best drivers in the world.
It's exciting.
Fact of action.
It's fun.
It's the best racing in the world.
It's electrifying.
Join me, Nikki Shields, for CNN Supercharged, as we travel to some of the world's most iconic cities in search of eco-friendly transport and the technology that drives it. Formula E and beyond.
CNN Supercharged, Sunday on CNN, in association with DHL.
A Russian curler is crossing his fingers while waiting for the results of a second drug test. That's after he failed a first doping test at the Winter Games. Amanda Davis has more from Pyeongchang.
With only 3 gold medals up for grabs here on Monday, it really has been a day where sports news has dominated over the